Functions are one of the most important parts of any programming language. In fact, throughout this entire course, we have used functions in every lesson. We have used echo religiously, and we've also used printr. Now, we didn't use printr very much, but we did so whenever we wanted to see the structure of an array. But these are things that provide useful functionality. They are there so that we don't have to write the code that make them work. Like, for example, echo. In order to write something out to the page, or to the HTTP response, if you will, we just have to use the echo function. We then pass in whatever data that we want to display within the page, and that's it. But the code behind the echo function, the code that is actually executed when we call the echo function, well, let's just say that there's more than one line here. But the echo function makes it simple so that whenever we want to write something to the output, we just call echo. Well, that is what a function is. It's code that we want to reuse that provides some very specific functionality, and we have the ability to write our own functions. Like, for example, let's say that we want to write a function for addition so that we can pass in some numbers and it will, add them together. Now, I know that we can do that very easily on our own. We can just say 1 plus 2, and that would give us the value of 3. But let's write a function to do that, so that it would look like this. We would say sum, because that's a good name for a function that adds numbers together. And then we can pass in the numbers that we want to sum, 1 and 2, and that would give us 3. So let's write that function. We start with the function keyword. Every function starts with function. And then we have the function name. So we are going to write a function called sum. That's what we call it. After the function name, we have a pair of parentheses and then a pair of curly braces. So we've just written a function. Now, it of course doesn't do anything, but it is there. But let's go ahead and do this. We have that result variable. Let's go ahead and let's see what we get. So we're going to output result. And whenever we view this in the browser, we don't see anything, of course, because the sum function doesn't do anything yet. So the first thing we really need are the values that we are going to work with. We are passing 2 numbers to the sum function, so we need some way to denote that we are getting data so that we can work with that data. So we have what are essentially variables. We call them parameters, but they are variables. They are variables for a function. So you have the function name, you have a pair of parentheses, and inside of the parentheses, you have what's called the parameter list. These are the parameters that this function is expecting in order to perform its work. So I've called these parameters A and B, but we could call them whatever we want. We could have number 1 and then number 2, if that's what you really wanted to do. But A and B is going to be fine. So inside of the sum function, we need to work with that data. We need to add them together. So we say A plus B, but that's not enough. We have performed the addition operation, but we need to return this result because right now it doesn't do anything. It just adds them together. So we have what's called a return statement. We say return and then the data that we want to return. So now, whenever we call the sum function, we pass in 1 and 2. That's going to give us the result of 3, and we will see 3 in the document. Now, I want to point out that I have reused the same name here. We have a result variable inside of the sum function. We have a result variable outside of the sum function. Now, even though they have the same name, they are 2 different variables. The variable that we have inside of the sum function is called a local variable. It is local to the sum function, and it is only accessible inside of that function. And this result variable is called a global variable. It is outside of a function, and it is completely separate from this result variable. Now, I should also point out that whenever we have called echo, we haven't used parentheses. We've just had a space and then whatever data that we wanted to send to the response. And here, whenever we call the sum function, we have the parentheses there. Well, what gives? Well, I've been calling echo a function when really it's not a function. It's a construct of the language, but it's just easier to say it's a function. So when you use echo, it's actually easy to get away without using parentheses. And if you use parentheses, it's still going to work just fine. But that is the main difference as to why whenever we use echo, we don't have to use parentheses if we don't want to. Whenever you call a function like sum, you have to use the parentheses. That's how you execute or run that function. So we have a function that accepts information and then it returns a value, but not every function is going to return a value. There are some functions that just perform a specific task. So let's write a function to do that. Whenever we have used an array, let's go ahead and create an array. Let's use our trusty guitars array again. We'll have our Vela, our Explorer, and then our Strat. And whenever we wanted to see the structure of that array, we used print r. So let's do that. We'll use print_r, pass in our guitars, and then whenever we view this in the browser, we are going to see the structure, but it's not formatted, at least whenever it is rendered in HTML. In order to see the actual structure, we have to view the source, and there it is. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a function that would wrap whatever it is that we are using print r with pre-tags, so that it would look something like this. We would have an echo and pre, and then we would have print r, and then after that we would have echo and then our closing pre-tag. And whenever we go back to the browser, there we have our formatted array structure. Now, the thing about this is every time we want to do this, we would have to write these 3 lines of code. We would have to have our opening pre-tag, we'd have to call print r and then pass in whatever data that we were going to work with, and then have our closing pre-tag. So we could write a function that would simplify that. So this is a perfect example of what the echo function or the echo command does. So let's do this. We're going to create another function called output, and we are going to work with some value. The print r function works with any type of value. It's not just arrays. It's just that we've been using it with arrays. And so in this case, we are going to use a pre-tag. We're going to echo out the opening pre-tag. We will print r, whatever value, and then we will echo the closing pre-tag, so that down here, this is all we have to do. We will call output and then pass in our guitars array, and we will have the same functionality. So we go back to the browser, we refresh the page, and there we go. So we have simplified our 3 lines of code into one, so that now anytime that we wanted to use this output function, we could. And that is something that we would probably put inside of a utility file so that anytime that we wanted to check a particular value, we could do that. So when it comes to functions, at the basic level, they are pretty easy to understand. You write a function by using the function keyword, giving it a name, and then any parameters that it may need, and then the code for that function. But there's some more complexity to functions, such as scope, and we very briefly touched upon it whenever I was talking about the variables called result. Well, that all works because of something called scope, and we are going to look at that in the next lesson.